case, ooh, very nice. Good timing. In that case, I believe it's time for demos. Is there anyone that wants to go first and show off the stuff they've been working on this last week?
I can go first.
Cool. Let's see it.
Let's go ahead. Let's see. Share screen. Okay, so mine and Dev's issue this week was having this input field to filter your list. So if I were to type P, then pi and pasta shows up, and you'll see, like, even though P is lowercase, it'll still show this one. So we made it case insensitive. And then if I put A, you'll see T, pastas, and jams. So like the other thing was not only including things that start with the letter A, just has to be included somewhere in the text. And then if you type whatever and click this button, it'll clear it up. So pretty simple. I thought this issue was gonna be a lot harder than it was, but so that was really nice. So then going over the code here, let me move this. Okay, so we moved the input field and the button down to only show when there's a list. I think Dana and Rafa pointed that out. So thank you for that. So the state is saved under filter text. And so on change, how we usually do it, just save it to e.target.value. And then the actual filtering itself is done down here. So let's see, what did we do? Okay, yeah, so value is the collection itself. So that's the entire list. And then first we filter it to only include the documents whose item field includes the same characters as filter text. And so we lowercase the item field and we lowercase filter text to make it case insensitive. So once those are filtered and it's only showing the documents that return true for this filtering, then we actually map it out and list out the items. So yeah, it's pretty simple, which is nice. And I think that's, yeah, I think that's it.
Cool. Nice work.
Yeah. We were able to get it done the first day, which was really nice. Yeah.
So not fair.
I know. I'm so sorry.
I was like, no, I was like, oh my gosh, you pushed that out in one day. That's amazing. I don't even want to talk to you.
Yeah, it was cool. No, we found like an article that like basically walked us through it. So it was really nice.
Cool. All right. Well, that leaves one other project. Who wants to demo that?
Okay, I'm gonna demo the app and then Rafa will go through the code.
Cool.
Okay. So I started another list because the list I used in testing started to get really long and overlap with these buttons here. So I made another list today. And so this is just the regular grocery list. And we added a couple things on the front end, just so in testing, we could see if it was working or not. So you'll notice red onion is checked and it's been purchased 3 times. It was last purchased like 10 minutes ago. And the estimated next purchase is 12 days from now. Carrots has been purchased once. So if I want carrots to show an estimated next purchase using that calculate estimate function that was imported, I'd have to purchase it again. So if it's not time to purchase it again, I would have to go into the list and find my carrots. Here's my carrots and manipulate the last purchase date. So say I purchased it on the 2nd. What's going to happen is I'm going to be able to click that again. When I click it again, the total purchases is going to go to 2. Now the estimated next purchase is not going to start calculating until I have more than 2 purchases. So I'm going to need to do it one more time. And we'll say the 7th. We'll update that. I'm going to click it one more time. So now it has a total purchases of 3. It can do that estimated next purchase now is 13 days based on the dates that I've purchased it on and that have been recorded in the database. And so the last purchase date again is now because I just clicked it. Estimated next purchase is 13 days from now, been purchased 3 times. And the information on how it calculates is from that index file in the shopping list utilities. And so we haven't dug really deep into that. The test file has more information about what it tests for and how the algorithm works. But we were able to at least get the functionality working that if we click it and it's been purchased more than 2 times, it'll calculate the next estimated purchase date. I'm going to hand it over.
Cool.
Okay, so as far as the code, one of the things that we need to do was to update the database schema, and we did so based upon what inputs we pass into the calculate estimate function. So that would be this previous estimate, the days since last transaction, which a transaction counts as both adding an item to the list as well as purchasing an item, and the total purchases. So in the add item view component, we updated the document reference so that when you first add an item to the list, it adds these fields. The last purchase date, the date added, which is the moment that you add it to the list, the estimated next purchase, which is initialized as null, and days since last transaction. And I added a comment here based upon Yenling's feedback in our PR that we could possibly just calculate this within the calculate estimate function itself instead of saving it to the database, and then total purchases. So in the list component, we added a couple of helper functions here. This one is used on the front end to format the date, and this one is used to calculate the days since the previous transaction. And so down here, this is mostly just us getting the document data from the database. And we have this helper function here, update estimate, which destructures these variables from the document data. And if there is no estimated next purchase, then we make the previous estimate as undefined because we can't initialize it as undefined in the database. And then we return calculate estimate with those variables passed in as arguments. And then we update the document when a user selects an item as purchased, the day since the last transaction, which is created using our calculate day since helper function. The last purchase date, which is just the current time. We update the total purchases by 1, and the estimated next purchase is gotten from the update estimate helper function up here. So, yeah. Oh yeah, and Viviana, I saw your feedback as well. And so we probably could refactor that function to just pass in the entirety of the document data instead of just the ID.
Yeah.
Awesome. Nice work. Yeah, that one was, in my opinion, one of the harder ones of the whole project. So good job on that.
I feel like hooting and hollering. Does anybody else feel like hooting and hollering? That was fun.
Yeah, that was a lot. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Rafa did a lot of the meat of that code. Have to give you props. Some amazing work.
And we definitely walked through it together. Like I would not have been able to think through that without you. So
thank you for partnering. It was fun.
Yeah, I thought the demo that you recorded was really great, the way you explain it, and mapping out the things in the front. So for other people to test, and just how you test the functionality was very clear. I do, as a team, want to talk about you know, the extra fields that you added in the database schema. Like I understand it helps you get the estimate, but are those values necessary, and whether it's something you would reuse again? Then what are the cases of, and I think this is just an exercise in talking about trade-offs on different ways of doing it. Like if you're only given the schema and you can only follow a certain thing, like how would you design the schema to use less? Did I phrase that right? Maybe not.
Are you meaning more like store some of those things in state and calculate the estimate that way? Yeah.
It could be, yeah. Or it could be things that you have in your app and you pass it. Like one of the database schema is when the item was added on the list and you had a timestamp. When does that get reused again? And you know, maybe in a bigger schema of things, like you may use it later, but for as of right now, you have last purchase and you have date added. What does the date added do? Like when will you use it again?
It's a good point.
Yeah, I couldn't really think of an instance where we would use it again. The only reason we use it in the first place is because like the calculate estimate function itself counts adding an item as a transaction.
Yeah. So just stuff to think about. There's no right or wrong answer, because I do think depending on where you work, like for me as a front end, we don't really have control in what the back end. I mean, you work with back end to kind of define what the schema is, but then like adding things and how things organize sometimes become like a bigger team conversation on like why and how we structure things. So that's just something that I thought we should bring up.
That's a really good perspective. I think sometimes when we go into solve it, we look for the solve and look for that first. And then by the time we get to the solve, like the week's over. But like in the real world, we would get to the solve and then make the solve better and then think of all the different other ways we could solve, or else spend more time at the front end thinking through how many different ways there are to fix it. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, one of my lead team leads, when I paired him or when we work on something, oftentimes he's all like, that's a good first pass, but we could do better. And sometimes like, especially when it's a really hard thing, it's like, we got it working. Let's just move. Yeah. Cheers. Let's move on. And he's like, but we could do better. I'm like, oh, you okay.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a good exercise because you come back and you do another strategy. And then like, as you move on in career, or I think in interviews, being able to talk about the two approaches and what are the trade-offs is like a really good skill to build upon.
Yeah, and I would add on to that and say that on my team at 1Password, we spend most of our time talking about how we implement things. So sometimes weeks of lots of back and forth, and we have a lot of security things to take into consideration also, so it influences how we design things. But then eventually we just have a document that outlines in English how we go and write things. So whether or not things live in the database and how to calculate those things, etc. And so there's a lot of discussion even before we get to an MR in some cases, which allows you to make certain arguments for one way versus the other way, and then everyone can have an input, and then the code gets written. That's another way of doing it too.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely important to think about because we were definitely approaching this from a perspective of just trying to get it done. And so maybe in the future, if it comes up again where we're going to be making these overarching changes, we should bring everybody else into the conversation as we're working on it.
I think what you've done is really great. Like you managed to build a whole thing with no help from just the two of you, which is great because historically that issue can be really hard, and you know, office hours, and then on top of it, like the reuse cycle of like, oh, now this you're missing this part, and then like having to redo or do better kind of thing can happen. So that was really great. Any other feedback? No? Okay. So we can move on to the learning module. Communications for devs. Let me see if I can do. All right. So I love this topic the best, and is probably why we're here. Communication is key, and I think it's not just in web development, it's in almost everything we do in life, right? Like when you have good communication, like everything can work really well. But how we can use communication. So there are many different ways of communicating. I think for so far, it's been what, our 5th week or 6th week now, and all the different ways we can communicate. One thing is documentation. I think this one is pretty obvious why we would do it. Writing things down help you learn. Like if you're sitting down and writing something and it becomes really hard to get it down, then that is a signal to yourself that maybe you don't understand the system as much as you think you do, right? So that's a good exercise, and it's going to feel uncomfortable, and it's a good kind of uncomfortable to feel. And then it's a great tool for revisiting big decisions, just kind of like how Tanner gave a really good example about, the communication and a lot of the conversations that goes before even writing any code, all the planning. Like this project is on purpose broken down in a way so that you can pick up and code. And then we talk about all the different aspects as like a good practice for us. In a real job, sometimes you're being given like an idea of, we want to build this thing. You just don't go, oh, that thing, we're just going to sit down and build it. You start to have conversations, plan it out, talk about schemas, and developing an engineering project plan, which you want to spell out at different levels of a high level of what are the things like that is in scope that we are going to build. And in that process, you realize, oh, when you're scoping, it becomes too big. So then, oh, these are huge chunks that need to happen. So what does that do? Take smaller chunks. And it's also very useful for onboarding new team members. When I joined, it's really good to read documentation. And then also not just to read as in like, oh, this is the word of the Bible. It's more of you read documentation to understand where the team currently is at or was at, because most times documentation can be a little outdated. It's hard to keep up with documenting and have conversations and code and build things. So that's why it's super important. It also avoids like institutional knowledge, as in people can work on something, specialize it, be really niche in it, and not write any documentation. And who knows, life happens, this person have to change jobs or something happened to them. Now the rest of the team will have a huge gap in the system, right? As engineers, it's important for all of us to have a sense of what our system is in order for us to start adding to it or modifying it. And it also helps empower all the team members. You don't have to be the team lead or the expert to write documentation. One of the best ways to contribute as someone who's new to the team is to read the documentation and make note of all the areas that are confusing, or it becomes unclear. And that is the best time as a new person to say, hey, I'm not sure I understand this part, and start asking questions. And oftentimes you'll find that people who are there and been busy working, and when you ask them that question, they're like, oh, right, we have not updated this documentation in 3 months. We build a lot of things from 3 months to now. Now we need to like update, or however that was certain decisions that were made, like someone forgets to write it down, then it's out of sync with what's in the code base. So a lot of times it starts a lot of conversation, which is also super important. So for some quick tips is write for the person who knows the least, because then you are more clear. You want that person to be able to read what you wrote and get context pretty quickly. And then optimize for the person who needs a quick reference in terms of how you format. And we do have a really great example. So this one might be an old URL, but React Router writes really good documentation where it's really quick. You can find certain things and clear examples. And then you want to make it visual and accessible so that you don't have to jump over hoops to get to. Like if I can't find the documentation, I'm just going to be like, oh, forget it. I'm just going to do this. So a lot of times as a new person or being part of a team, being able to contribute to this in however form, it's always a win and welcomed. And then the other part in how we communicate as engineers is pull requests. And you've seen that in the last few weeks in how we can have conversations with each other. Pull request gives reviewer context on your code, and it helps reviewers walk through your code so that it's a way of sharing context and knowledge pretty quickly. And depending on how you set up your pull requests, you earn trust. The way that you've been structuring your pull requests and providing the demos and the walkthroughs and giving tips on how to test, you're earning my trust that I know what you're doing. So then sometimes I can scan it real quick and trust that what you're presenting to me is what's in the code. I don't need to check every single line to make sure that it's right. So that's why pull requests are so great. It's also like a really big part of interviewing, like to talk through and provide a description and like summarizing technical things. And I think you've done all of these already. I don't think I need to tell you like the screenshots, the videos, or references. I do want to highlight the keep your PR small and narrowly scoped. I think that is the one hardest thing for people to learn as like when you're starting out in your career. It's very easy to feel like, oh, I want to work on this, I want to work on this. And then everything gets all lumped together. And then it's also harder to ask for help when you're in between functionalities where it gets to a certain point where you don't know which is causing what. So isolating it is a good approach. And then comments in code. We haven't really talked about it, but so far what you're doing is really great. Pointing out the whys. Yeah, it gives your team more context. It answers questions that the code doesn't, like for constant variables. When you use a certain time now, like the way you name the variable is self-documenting, so it works. But let's say we have like a constant sometime, like we have to multiply something by a certain number, like it's good to comment it and let people know what that represents, just other than just a number. Let's see. I do recommend, so if you haven't heard of Sarah Drasner, I'm a big fan. She's a core maintainer of Vue.js, but she's also does a lot of things. If you're on Twitter, you'll know she's the creator of the Night Owl theme. And she had one talk that she did for ReactConf, I think, that talks about the art of code comments. It's so much fun. I like rewatching it sometimes. She's real. Let's see. And then other things that we haven't really focused on here, it's also a way for us to communicate. It's not just pull requests, it's not just your code, and it's not just talking. There's like tests that we should be writing. And to be fair, not many companies do tests when they should be. But tests is also another way to communicate with each other and sharing the knowledge and how something should work. Issues is one of them too. Sometimes, when you're looking at something and you find areas that are broken, you file a bug, and that's a form of communicating to, oh, here's what's broken, here what needs to be fixed. So a lot of conversation can happen in issues in the comments area. And then project boards is a way to communicate your status and letting people know where you're at, the way that you've been updating your issues on the board, moving it to like mentor review in progress or team review. That is like a fantastic way to show other people where you're at without them needing to knock on your door. Like engineering managers like to know where you're at and be able to check on things without having to ask you all the time, because that's micromanaging, right? You want a manager who will have one-on-ones to see how you're doing, but when they're not meeting with you, they can check the project board and know like, oh, the issues that you're working on, where it's moving along, then you're good, you know, like they can do like a spot check. And then retrospective board was also a way for us to communicate. And that one is to be able to have feedback, give feedback. You know, it's really important to have that, to verbalize. It makes a team more, it's a way to bond, I think, and to figure out how to do better. And I think different ways of communication is also in Slack and Team. You know, how we thread things in Slack, how we asynchronously reply to somebody. Like you want to be clear and concise, but not write a long novel, because especially when you're working with a remote team that is spread out, sometimes it's more, the expectation is, I have a question for somebody and I want to make sure they understand it and be able to reply to me. And the next time that I check and they reply to me, I understand. So written word is pretty important and helpful. Let's see, what else? I think that's most of the communication things. And then to this part, I want to brainstorm and for us to have a conversation around communication skills, right? So I'm kind of curious to hear what your experiences at TCL have been like. And then the other part, because we all come from a non-traditional CS background, I'm kind of curious to what are some things that you can bring from your other background to add to your career, developing your career. Does anybody want to go first?
I can go first. Is it okay if I go first? Okay.
Yes.
So I have a background in the craft coffee scene, which means I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people, which I find is a soft skill that can be hard to find in the engineering space, and has served me very well. Like just to be able to hold a conversation with someone surprisingly has got me a lot further than sometimes I feel like I should be. So Rob, don't tell anyone that. Thank you. But it is a skill that shouldn't be overlooked, right? Like there's a lot of code things that you can be good at, but just being able to engage in a conversation, especially like knowing the words and stuff to use and have a technical conversation, but it's something that should not be underappreciated, I suppose.
Yeah, similar to me, like my background's in design, so it was a lot of just user research and just interviewing people who don't really have like the technical vocabulary, I guess. So that's been like really good practice, having to speak in that way and being able to translate it in a technical way, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's been pretty helpful, I would say. And then as far as my experience here, I feel like everyone's been very communicative. I think like how you said, the walkthrough videos have been very helpful, and everyone in Slack has been very, very communicative, which is nice. It's nice being able to just peek into like other people's messages and see like what they're up to and how far they've come. And also just like in office hours, I've come to some that like I didn't even have any questions and I was just like watching, and that was also very helpful. So it's been really nice to do that as well.
I guess I'll go. I guess like as far as my experiences in the Collab lab, like Teco Viviano like has been amazing. Like everybody's been very communicative over Slack, and it's honestly like relieved a little bit of the fear I had about like trying to get a remote job in the industry. I wasn't sure how like I would be able to like be onboarded into a team and be able to communicate with people well. And so this is a lot of giving me a lot of great practice with that. And as far as like my background, like my current job, I work in events at a college. And so I have to spend a lot of time in emails, meetings, like communicating logistics with people. Sometimes I'm working with students who don't know how to start from scratch to build a giant event. And so I have to figure out a way to like take the knowledge that I have and try to communicate that in a way that they can understand. And so, yeah, like I'm hoping that will give me some great practice when I go into the industry and I have to talk to stakeholders and communicate with my team.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think the way that you're navigating all the different communications and then tracking that and then coming back to it, I think that is like a strong skill for engineering, because as you're moving up, sometimes you could be working on more than one project, or you could be working on one project, and as things are, you can transition in and out of projects, and then the context sharing and making sure that everybody is aligned, or you have all the context you need to make decisions, like it really aligns with that. So I want you to remember that and like use that as examples in your interview.
Okay, I didn't even think of that.
Anybody else?
I could go. My background, I came from a very large Italian family that had a restaurant. And so when I was very young, from a young age, I was taught to be very hospitable and welcoming and very face-to-face with people. And so that's not my natural personality, but that's how I was brought up. And so that comes naturally to me. And I have a 20-year career in the travel industry, and I was able to lead virtual teams and have responsibility for like overnight management of shifts with between like 10 and 100 people at a time, and make sure people were where they need to be and hold team meetings and drive us towards objectives. But I've also worked recently on the customer side in a personality assessment company, which is very interesting because our clients are psychologists and PhDs and people that are delivering assessments to other people to help them live better lives. And so it's made me more interested in how different people communicate and what we each bring to the table, and how we can, work well with other people that have different preferences than we do. So that's like a lot of different things. And I think a lot about how to frame that in the job situation that doesn't date me or age me in a certain way. You know what I mean? How do you, like, if you've had a lot of experience outside of a particular industry, how do you boil that down to one or two sentences that's relevant now? So that's something that I think about.
Yeah, I think the examples you're giving me are really great. Like, it shows that you're adaptable and flexible, and that you interface really well. So that shows a lot of potential that you will do good in engineering, because it's not about like be the best coder. The amount of code you actually write in a day or a week is actually pretty low compared to all the interfacing that you will need to do. Rob, anything to share? Oh no, I can't hear you.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
hello?
Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like a microphone from your laptop, maybe, but that's okay.
Probably that's the case. One second. Okay, how's that?
Much better.
Love Zoom. I actually do have a very traditional CS background for it, but I actually worked in events when I was in college a little bit, and that is its own different kind of experience. I was helping like organize basically teams of servers for banquets and things, which is fun. But I guess what I wanted to mostly say was to echo some of the things that Yenli had mentioned. I love the idea of treating tests as communication. That is super valuable. Whenever you can write a test to explain what you were trying to do, or what you hope that this code continues to do, it's very useful. And then the stuff about basically when you join a team, helping them with their documentation. Totally. That's something that we do all the time at my job. We rely on fresh faces basically to make sure that our documentation is fresh. And so that's something that would be a huge help to the next team that you join, is to just give it those fresh eyes. And it doesn't just only help the rest of your team and the next people joining, but it helps you kind of like understand what's going on. It gives you kind of a good thing to tackle as a first problem rather than trying to jump straight into code. You can jump into some of the documentation and kind of make sure that you can work your way to where you're supposed to be from there. Yeah, I think that's it.
One thing though, I'm kind of curious in is, I figure I should ask, like, if anyone here feels like there are certain parts of communicating that you feel are still kind of fuzzy, that you want to ask us questions, or areas that you want to develop on, I definitely would encourage you to express that and see if we can help in any way.
Before my Mac dies, sorry to do this, I'm going to go run grab a charger and I'll be right back.
Okay.
I think for me, the one thing is when we get like feedback like on Sunday itself, it's kind of hard to like actually acknowledge it and like go through with it. So I feel kind of bad that like I see like the great feedback and then I'm like, there's no time. So we just kind of keep going. So I wasn't sure if like that's fine, that we kind of have to selectively accept certain feedback and like some that we don't, if that's okay. So I know you guys take the time to like go through our code and like you guys give like really good feedback as well, but we can't like do all of it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's definitely my fault too, or like anyone that leaves a comment on Sunday, it's probably wasn't like intentional. Usually I do try to get to it sooner, but my life's been kind of a shit show, to be honest with you, outside of work lately. So
That's okay.
it's been hard. So usually it's like, oh, Sunday, like I'm finally caught up on things and I spent some time before the call to review, but in a perfect world, it would not be that case. And I apologize. That's mostly my fault. And you can feel free to look past any comment I do leave.
No, not at all. I think sometimes we're not done reviewing each other's code yet. So it wouldn't be the
Yeah.
expectation that you'd be picking it up yet. That doesn't all lie with you. I wish there were a couple extra days in the week to be able to implement all the things that we wanted to do.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
So this is pretty common, because it is like capacity depending on how people work. There are certain ideals, cycles, or cadence that we want to keep to, and then, like Tanner said, shit happens. So a lot of times that is the flexibility in knowing that, asking for feedback, and sometimes it takes a while. And then that is also the other part of doing this job, is trying to decide when you have a lot of different feedbacks. Like right now we haven't yet, but let's say you do get the feedback early, and between the three of us, we all give you a different feedback on what you should do or different perspective. And I think part of the job is to understand what the three are, or what the different things are, how it differs with you. And then at the end of the day, you make the decision to do what you need to do, right? And then sometimes it's also making the decision to not make the change too. And that's also okay in terms of like, oh, right, because sometimes people can pose a question that could open a can of worms that be like building a whole big other thing. But as of right now, you have to make that decision of, right, so we're not going to fix this now, but we're going to file a ticket and we're going to approach this and really plan it out first before building. So those are common things too, that can happen. So I want you to like also know that, so that when you join a company and someone who's perceived as like a superstar or team lead tell you to do something, like, and you're supposed to deliver next day, like don't spend from now no sleeping till when you need to deliver to try to build this feature, because it doesn't help everyone. Sometimes it's knowing when to say, we're going to go with this. Is that okay? And we're going to file a ticket and let's take care of it next time or tomorrow right afterwards. Because like software building it's layering on complexity.
Okay, that
And
makes sense.
just to add on to that, it's also okay if you don't have that confidence. If you have somebody on your team that you are like you trust, that maybe has been there more or has a better idea of some of the stakeholders and who needs to be involved in what, then you can just go ask for a feel on, especially if it's like conflicting advice. Like, is this something I really need to do in this PR? Or is this something that we could save for later? Because sometimes it is. Sometimes it is like, no, you can't merge that code. And so you don't want to say, sorry, my deadline's tomorrow, I'm merging it anyway, right? So you just have to find somebody who you can trust to give you the inside scoop, I guess, if it's not immediately clear.
Do you find it hard to review the code in a way that's, I don't know. Let me give you my perspective. When I receive comments on the code, I've always found them to be very helpful and point in the right direction and be very constructive about, hey, you might want to think about doing it this way, or, there's definite details as to what could be improved and why. Has that always come naturally to you, or did you have to find your way to write that? Like, and do people get offended when you write comments sometimes on the job? Like, how does that operate in the world?
Yeah, I don't think it comes naturally at all. It's not easy because like for a while you're just learning how to code, and that's enough to think about.
Yeah.
Just getting it to work and to compile, and then to like actually be able to critique yourself is another step, and then critiquing others is a whole nother layer of confidence in your own ability that can be hard to find within yourself. But the best advice is just to try to review as much as you can, and maybe if you feel like you're not leaving the best review, just keep trying and read other people's reviews too and how they articulate things. And but it's its own skill. There's like coding, and then there's reviewing code, and it's very much two different paths that both require attention. So
yeah, I'd say that there are people at all different levels of I guess maturity when it comes to feedback, and it can be easy sometimes to get a little bit possessive of work that you've done, right? And especially if you're working on something by yourself and not with a group of other people, then comments on PRs can start to feel a little bit more personal. And so there are people who will respond that way. There are people who will give feedback in a way that is not always the nicest way to phrase something, I guess, maybe. Not that they're trying to be mean, but that they're just not thinking about how it might sound to someone receiving it.
it's far from a Rafa comment. We can just say that.
What's that?
So it's far from a Rafa comment. Rafa's comments are always so well spoken, and
Yes.
sometimes
Yep. And this can be people that have been in the industry for a long time, and they're like the old get off my lawn people, or they can be people that are brand new that are like they think they know it all, and it's everybody has different experiences that they're working from.
Mm-hmm.
Off of that, I do have a question. How do you guys handle like being paired with somebody who has that kind of attitude? Like, do you have any tips?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Do you call that being paired with a jerk? What is that?
I mean, I wouldn't use those words, but
Like challenging.
Usually, there's a couple of things. Like one I found in most debates over how to implement something, there's usually a way to intellectually propose your argument that can outsway one opinion over the other. It's frustrating when someone says we should do it this way and they don't have a backup for that. And that's when things can get frustrating. But typically, if they are suggesting one way of doing it, they have a reasoning behind it. And if you have a suggestion of your own, you should probably try to have a reasoning behind your own. And then you can compare reasonings and figure out which way to do it. And I find usually that's helpful. I've very rarely been in a situation where I'm pairing with someone and there's a proposition with no reasoning and we're just like stuck on that we should do it this way. It's only happened a couple times in my career, and it is frustrating, but there's really a lot you can do about that other than to try to articulate your own argument in a fact-based kind of XYZ, this is why we should do it like this way. And usually that can move the conversation and project forward.
I like to approach it as like it's one way of doing things. So I like to approach it as being curious, and then like how Tanner said, you know, instead of saying no, that's like wrong, right? Like you want to learn why people suggest what they suggest and why they're so attached to it. And then if you can come from it in a direction of like, okay, yeah, that's one way of doing it. You know, you could be like, let's talk about the different ways and then go from there. Then when you present it that way, then that person can't be like, no, that's like my way or the highway. And then sometimes if they're really that adamant and you know it's going to be a mistake, it sometimes is helpful to let them move a little further down until they know, like until they hit that roadblock. But I don't have a easy answer for you either. A lot of times this is where you want to find people who work respectfully, and this person obviously is not, right? So it is harder to navigate and then have to really figure out like different ways.
The only thing
kinda
that came,
talk through it. Mhm,
sorry.
go ahead.
the only thing that came to mind is, and I think everybody's already understood and has been doing this, is to let preferences be preferences. And so if it's like, if that's the level of a change it is, and it's the kind of person that you don't really want to argue with, then you could change it. Or if you feel like it, just say, I like to write it this way. And it, you know, there are other examples of, you know, you're not like breaking off from the norm of the code base if they're showing you that or whatever. When it comes to actual things that need to be discussed and decided on, yeah, I think what everybody else has already said applies there.
You think there's more blocks when somebody doesn't know how to do something? I find like if I don't know how to do something, I'm more likely to ask a question than to throw up a like, hey, no, I have to do it this way because this is the only way I know. I kind of like just say like, this is how I know. Do you know something else that would help? Like, please. Like, let's share, because like I'm only limited to what I know. I would really like to know what the other person knows.
I think that's probably the most common attitude. I think when it's different than that, it might be from an insecurity of showing how little they understand. That can happen sometimes, where they want to put up a false pretense of confidence or experience.
We all have gaps.
Rob, do you want to do issues?
Yeah. All right. So let me find my window here. Safari. Okay, so we have, these are the last two fully spec'd out issues for our project. And the first one here is I want to be able to delete items from the shopping list. So my list isn't cluttered with items I don't want to buy in the future. So implementing a button or functionality to be able to delete an item from the list. Acceptance criteria, you also want to make sure that you prompt the user so that they don't delete things accidentally. And then in this case, we're actually deleting from the database. So that won't always be the case with all delete functionality that gets implemented in the world. But these are actual permanent deletions, not just setting something to be called deleted. And then our second one as a user, I want to view a list of my shopping list items in order of how soon I am likely to need to buy each of them again, so that it's clear what I need to buy soon. So everything gets sorted by next purchase date. And then you also have these categories of timeframes. So fewer than 7 days, between 7 and 30, more than 30. We've got a couple other acceptance criteria in here talking about making them visually distinct so that you can see at a glance which ones are in each of those three groups, but then sorted by the actual number. If something is the same number of days, then you sort it alphabetically. And then this is a good point here. You should be able to read a screen reader should be able to announce the different states well. All right, so the first one, being able to delete items from the list. Second one, the view of the items to be sorted and categorized by time for next purchase. So does anybody have a preference?
I would prefer to take an item that requires less collaboration this week. It looks like Dev might have some challenges with time frame. He's committed, like he sent me a message and he's committed to like doing as much work as he needs to do. But I'm thinking that if he's flying to India on Wednesday and we're limited to Monday and Tuesday, a lighter issue would be helpful. To me, in my mind, the delete issue looks lighter. Would that be the case?
It seems like it to me.
I would very much like to take that issue if that's okay with Rafa and Viviana. I know that was not optimal for Rafa and Viviana, and I do apologize.
No, that's fine. I kind of wanted to do number 12, so that works out.
Yeah, same here. You're all good.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So you said it's you and Dev this week, and I'll assign the other one and start those threads. I will also post the meetup thing for office hours. We can figure that out for this week.
Cool.
Anything else?
No?
All righty. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Good luck this week.
Yeah,
Thank
Bye.
you.
See ya.
have a good week.
Bye.
You too.